everybody. I'm Heather Riggs here at the New England Museum Association in Arlington, Mass. Welcome to the Historic Sites PAG lunch today. I'm super excited for this subject too, and obviously a bunch of you are as well. I'm going to turn it over to Emma Stratton, our one of our co-chairs, to get the ball rolling.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. Hi, I'm Emma Stratton. I am the Executive Director at Portsmouth Historical Society in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and welcome to our monthly virtual lunch for the Historic Sites PAG. Before we get to introducing our speakers today on period room interpretation, I want to introduce my co-chairs as well for the PAG. So Kaylee, would you mind saying a few words?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Perret Shaughnessy, and I'm the Executive Director at the Whittier Birthplace in Haverhill, Massachusetts. We are the childhood home of John Greenleaf Whittier, the abolitionist and poet. And I will like to hand it off to our third co-chair, Robin Sherman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Sherman. I'm the Curator and Director of Preservation at Castle in the Clouds in Moultonborough, New Hampshire. And I'm really excited to hear what Erica and Bekki have to say today. So back to Emma.
Great, thank you. So thank you all again for joining us today. This is a topic that has come up quite often in the Historic Sites PAG around period room interpretation. And I'm really excited to have two individuals here with us today. Erica McAvoy, who's the former executive director at the Moffatt-Ladd House in Portsmouth, and Bekki Coppola, who's the director of education at Strawbery Banke Museum. You'll hear from both of them, and each I feel like took really new and innovative approaches to reinterpretation. Erica will talk about the Yellow Room restoration at Moffatt-Ladd, which I think just opened a week or so ago, so is brand new. And Bekki Coppola will be talking about the Walsh House, which was more of a whole house interpretation, but done some really interesting things in terms of being much more hands-on and focused on visitor engagement. So I'm really excited to hear from both of them. We're so glad you're here with us. And with that, I will turn it over to Erica to get us started.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you to the PAG group for inviting us here and for having this conversation. This is very exciting. So as Emma mentioned, I'm the former executive director of the Moffatt-Ladd House. I was there until about I think July. So I'm now the executive director of the Whittier Home Association, which is not the childhood home of John Greenleaf Whittier, where Kaylee is the executive director. I am the manager of his adult home, which again are two separate organizations, naturally. I'm also a part-time professor of history at Middlesex Community College in Lowell, and I'm a PhD student in history at UNH. So that's what I'm doing. But I was the executive director of the Moffatt-Ladd House for much of the restoration work that was done there. And so let me just share my screen so that you can see my little slide. Here we go. Okay, so the Yellow Chamber restoration is part of the Moffatt-Ladd. The Yellow Chamber is one of the rooms in the Moffatt-Ladd House, which is a 1763 mansion built in Portsmouth, right downtown on Market Street. It was built by John Moffatt, and it was built for his son Samuel, who was just sort of getting started in life, getting married. And so it's a 3-story Georgian mansion. I believe is the first 3-story home in Portsmouth, built in Portsmouth. And so it's kind of a unique place. It has a unique layout in its design for a variety of reasons, but it's now owned and operated by the Colonial Dames, the National Society of the Colonial Dames in the state of New Hampshire. And they've owned it since the late 1800s, or have managed it since the late 1800s. So throughout the 20th century, they've done a lot of period room restoration to varying degrees of sort of accuracy. The Dames are very good stewards of the physical house itself. They're great preservationists and have done really good work as far as the research of how the home actually looked, as well as keeping it, maintaining it. So excuse me. I'm sorry for the grainy picture, but unfortunately I couldn't get a good picture of the site of the room when it was first restored, but this was restored in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, as sort of a bicentennial era project. But basically what the dames did is they go from room to room essentially throughout the 20th century, restoring these rooms to various time periods. Some of them were from the Revolutionary period, some were from the early 19th century. So depending on sort of what the best documentation was for that room, that's kind of where they would land. So this room, as I said, had been done in the 70s and early 80s, and it was called the Yellow Chamber at the time. However, by the late 20-teens, or before that, actually, the room had it was starting to show its age. It had been restored about 50 years before that. The fabric was frayed. It was faded and frayed and just didn't look as well as some of the other rooms looked. So they thought it was time to have a go at this room because it is such an important room. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. But the dames just completed a restoration of their parlor downstairs, which came out beautifully, and that was completed in 2020, I believe. So they formed a committee in 2021 to start the restoration work of this room. Now, I say that it's an important room in the house because it's considered one of the best documented rooms in 18th century homes in America. And that is because there are 3 inventories that were conducted of this space in the 18 years between 1768 and 1786. I wrote down 1886, I meant to write 1786. So what happened was Samuel Moffatt, the son who first lived here, he got into some legal trouble, was in debt, and ended up fleeing the colony and ended up first in I forget where he first went, but ended up in Demerara and built a new plantation there in South America. And so he essentially just fled to avoid debtor's prison and to basically he ended up in a Dutch colony to evade the British law, essentially. So when he left, it's kind of a long story, I'll try to make it short, but his father, who still owned the home, contacted his friends in high places, and essentially they had an auction of the public auction of all the contents of the house, and his father arranged for many of his friends to buy back most of the content. So at that time there was an inventory conducted, and then in 1785, when William Whipple, who married John Moffatt's daughter, when he died in 1785, another inventory was conducted. And then a few months later, his father-in-law, John Moffatt, who originally built the house, he died, and yet another inventory was taken. So 3 inventories in the between 1760s and 1780s. It's almost unheard of. And these are very mostly detailed inventories, especially of the Yellow Chamber. So that being said, so how do we go about doing this? They started with a paint analysis, and essentially we wanted to find out what the original colors were. It was called the Yellow Chamber in the inventories. Did that refer to the yellow wallpaper, or did that refer to the yellow paint, or did it refer to both? So they conducted a paint analysis done by Amy Cole Ives from Sutherland Restoration, I think it is, or yeah, Sutherland Restoration Company. So you can see here, this is a screenshot of her report. She took samples from essentially all wood surfaces of the room. So the floors, the baseboards, the window surrounds, the fireplace surrounds, the doors, the closet doors, basically anywhere there was a painted surface, she took samples of it. And this had been done in, I think, 2005 by Brian Powell, I believe, from Historic New England. So she was building off of work that he had already done as well. But hers was much more, as far as my understanding goes, hers is much more detailed. So as you can see here are the samples that she conducted, or that she took. And then she developed this report. Basically, it's giving all the sections all of the samples that she took, and giving the original sort of circa 1765 color, what it would have looked like. You can see here let me see that my mouse, but the floorboard was likely unpainted. So from that, the committee had to decide whether or not they wanted to paint the room with sort of Benjamin Moore commercially produced historic colors of paint, or whether or not they wanted to actually use historically mixed paint, so how they would have created it in the 1760s. So ultimately, the committee decided to go for that option, which was, of course, the more expensive option. We did get some grant money for that. But you'll see here that we did go in that direction. So this is Chris Mills Conservation was hired to do this work. And one of the women who worked with him, and I'm sorry, I forget her name, but here she is mixing the paint. So they were using like an oil. Of course, some of the things that they used in the 18th century would not be used now, like lead paint, but they used as much of the original material that they could. And so with that, they developed both the base coat, which was a sort of grayish blue color you'll see in the picture on the right of the slide. This was identified by Amy Cole Ives in the page analysis as sort of this grayish base coat. And then from there was sort of that yellowish, beige-ish top coat. So this here is them painting, or in the middle of painting, the base coat. And there is the finished product of the end wall, the north wall of the room. This is the final finished paintwork. So you can see it's not quite yellow. It's more like a beigey yellow, and people had some feelings about that, but we were able to push through and realize that it's okay. It is most likely what it would have looked like. And so you'll notice here that the fireplace surround, the tiles are original to the 1760s. And we did have that tile that's missing. We did have that, and it was replaced. So that was exciting. You'll see that the fireplace surround has this sort of faux marbling. That is also original. The parts that aren't is the top area here. Hope you can see my mouse. I'm not sure if you can, but the top area is a little bit more yellow, and that was redone at some point or repointed, but on each of the sides is the original faux marbling. And that was very high style at the time. So she did confirm that that was original paint. So we did not touch that. We left it as is, and it's beautiful. So the next step was to scrape the paint and whatever other guck was found on the floor of the building, of the room. As I mentioned, that the paint analysis showed that the floor was most likely bare, and it was the case for the parlor downstairs as well. It was also a bare floor. So we hired Kate Shattuck to do this work. Kate Shattuck does painting and wallpapering for historic properties. She's amazing. If you need someone to do wallpapering or painting or removing stuff, she's your woman. So she started by essentially using some sort of wash. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it was, but sorry. And let me back up for just a moment. Before she did that, or before we painted, we stripped the wallpaper. So the old reproduction wallpaper came down. That was the first thing that happened. Then we painted the woodwork, and then we stripped the floor. So you can see on the right was the, I think, almost final look of the floor. It was completely bare, and it's quite neat because you can see different marks of where, we're not sure how those marks got there, but whether it was from, moving the wood in or just from when it was cut, we don't know. But it was really, it gives it a sort of sense of reality when you see the bare floor. It's really cool. So after she stripped the floor, we applied the paper. So fortunately, the Moffatt-Ladd house, as I said, is very well documented. We also have samples of the original wallpaper in the collection, as well as the original bed curtains that were in the room. So this picture on the left is not the original sample we went by. This is just an example of how when you remove this piece of furniture that was in the closet, we had this 1840s sort of bureau that was in there. When that was removed, you can see behind that this sort of sampling of the various wallpapers that had been applied to the wall over the course of the 250 years before, or 250 years, sorry, over the course of its history. So here you can see in the very bottom layer is that yellow wallpaper, and that is the original wallpaper there. So The original wallpaper sample that we had in the collection was sent down to Adelphi Paper Hangings in New York, and they're one of the few remaining real sort of 18th century reproduction wallpaper experts in the country. So we sent the sample down to them. They developed the stencil that they would use to create it, and then they sent it back to us for approval, and then they recreated the wallpaper. So what you see here on the right is the new wallpaper. So it's new, but it's a reproduction of the 1763-ish wallpaper that was in there. And so what's interesting about this wallpaper is that it had these beautiful hunting scenes that was like laid across the top like a frieze. And so this image here is taken from the website of Historic New England. Historic New England ended up with one of the, or two, I think two of the hunting scenes, but there were originally, I believe, 12. Moffatt-Ladd has 9 in its collection, and Historic New England has 2, meaning there is one that didn't survive, or perhaps they only ever had 11. I think that they probably had 12 because they were sets of 4. I'm sorry, there were 4 sets of images. So they were repeating images. And so this was one of the images here. And as I said, Historic New England owns this copy, but this is a better image of it. And they were directly printed onto the wallpaper. And they were done in the design of James Seymour, who created these stencils in the 1750s in England. So they were very fashionable at the time. And again, they were printed directly onto the paper. However, we couldn't do that in this case because Adelphi just didn't have the technology to do it. And they didn't want, I guess they couldn't do it exactly. They couldn't make it an exact replica of it. So we do have the original. We did have the original hunting scenes, as I said. So what we decided to do was create digital images of them. And the people that we brought them to in Portsmouth did a fantastic job. So what you're seeing here is the original, is the digital reproduction of the original images. So they were then applied onto the wallpaper by Kate Shattuck. So before that, the Moffatt-Ladd had the original hunting scenes hung on in Mylar, hung on the wall, and they were on display for about 50 years. So I told them that, we need to take these down because they need a rest. They need a little bit of a rest. And so we decided to put them in archival paper and store them in the collections. And so I think that what they decided to do was to sort of display a few of them sort of on a rotating basis to protect them from the light. So what you see here is the reproductions, which came out fantastic. So we also had, this is Richard and Jane Nylander, who I'm sure many of you know, are longtime museum professionals, now retired. And Richard is the leading wallpaper expert in the country. And Jane is a expert on textiles. So this here is a picture of us examining the original sample that we have of the yellow damask. And so on the right here, I have the sample or the section of the inventory that shows what was in that room: one yellow damask bed and curtains, covered chairs, covered easy chair, and window curtains. So these were all made from the same fabric. So we had that great sample. That sample was sent off to Gainsborough Silk and Weaving Company in the UK and England. It was reproduced and sent back over to us. And that is that gigantic roll you see here. And so on the right is the original. On the left, the right-hand side of the screen is the original sample to the left, and on the right is the new reproduction fabric of it. We decided to go with cotton damask instead of silk because we did not want to, instead of wool, because we didn't want to have we want to avoid webbing clothes moths as much as possible, because they are a nightmare, as I'm sure you all know. So this is our new shining, shimmering, splendid yellow damask here, and it's just beautiful. So I don't want to include images of the restored room, as Emma mentioned, it did just reopen, I think this year, this month. And they did share some images of it on their Facebook. So go to Moffatt-Ladd's Facebook and check that out, or their Instagram. And if you get a chance, go to the museum to see it yourself, because from the images that I saw, it is just absolutely stunning. So aside from the damask, we also had in the inventory, there were 6 side chairs that were in the room. So we purchased from Colonial Williamsburg a set of 6 1760s side chairs, very similar to what they would have had there. And we used this fabric to, reupholster them. We reupholstered the side chair that was already in the room. We weren't quite sure of the date of that chair, but it was appropriate enough to use it in that space. The bed was a black fluted walnut bed. We couldn't find an original bed to purchase, so we, that was appropriate. So we ended up having one made by a gentleman in Virginia, and I can't remember his name, but and that was about a $10,000 project, and I was able to get a donation from one of our members to cover that cost. So that was really, really fortunate. What else did I want to share? So my last point, I guess, was that the interpretation of this room. So during this process, we were also doing an interpretive planning process with Kristen Gallus, who I believe is here in this virtual room with us, and Elizabeth Nevins, who is an education consultant in the museum field. And so we were working with them on how to sort of be more inclusive in our storytelling and talk more about, center the story of the enslaved people who were enslaved at Moffatt-Ladd, more, just give them more of a voice, which the Moffatt-Ladd had been telling slavery stories for a long time, but we wanted to make it sort of more, I guess, more thematic in approach. For this room, the opportunity for this would have been sort of, how this room shows how the Moffats in Portsmouth were connected to the 18th century Atlantic economy and connected to the rest of the British Empire in that way. We could have talked on or taught lessons of consumerism and how, the British elite sort of in the colonies were consuming goods from Britain. These were all English imports in this room. So themes of freedom and unfreedom as well. So these were all interpretive sort of themes that we could have, use this room to highlight. So I left in July of 2024, and so I am not sure how they're moving forward with the interpretation of it, other than the fact that it's a very realistic example of an 18th century bedroom that of this bedroom in particular, and it's well documented. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and so that's I think that's all I've got for right now, unless anyone has questions, but I'm assuming we'll do that later. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erica. My gosh, the detail you all went into. Yes, that was amazing. Having those records is unbelievable, but then the level of detail of care and craftsmanship that you went to recreate that is just fantastic. So yeah. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to Bekki and have her talk about Strawbery Banke. But just to say to folks who are on the call, if you'd like to drop any questions into the chat, please feel free to. But we will have time at the end for question and answer for both Bekki and Erica. But if you have anything that you really want to get off your chest, just drop it in the chat and we'll look through those when it's time for Q&As. All right, so thank you again, Erica. That was wonderful. And now I want to turn it over to Bekki Coppola, who, as I mentioned, is the Director of Education at Strawbery Banke Museum, which is also here in Portsmouth. And she is going to talk to us about the reinterpretation of the Walsh House. So, Bekki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. The Walsh House at Strawbery Banke, we started the reinterpretation in 2019 and completed it in 2022. It is a sea captain's house. We chose the period of 1802 because that was what we had a lot of research in previously. And our goal was to create a completely hands-on space furnished with complete reproductions, but also giving visitors the opportunity to sort of see how we know what we know and kind of be the historians and looking through the evidence in the house to come to some conclusions of their own. We furnished. So unlike the yellow chamber, which needed to be completely um, redone, the Walsh House had already been restored. And so the only thing that we did was here in the dining room needed new wallpaper. So we chose a period appropriate wallpaper, not one that we knew was in the house, and put that up. But we have 4 rooms that we did the kitchen, the dining room, the formal parlor, and then the family parlor we chose to turn into a um, makeshift bed chamber. And I'll talk a little bit about that, why we made that decision. But we had 4 rooms that were furnished completely with reproductions. And the way that we chose those um, reproductions for our interpretive planning process was first the inventory. So there was an inventory done in 1807 of the house. Surprisingly, it was not a very large inventory. At that point in time, Mrs. Walsh had passed away. Captain Walsh was at sea, as was, we know, some of his sons, and his oldest daughter had already been married. So it's possible that there weren't many people living in the house, and when Captain Walsh was at sea. So we started there and we looked at the inventory. We tried to get reproductions of all of those items that were in the inventory. Um, we looked at census records, death, marriage, birth records, all of those things to get a sense of who was living in the house and their ages at the time. And we did things like we have a reproduction family Bible, and we listed in the front what we know about the people who live there. So we didn't have all the information, exact dates, but we listed what we knew. We added, a lot of people can't read cursive anymore, so we added the printed part in the back so that people could find these clues. The magnifying glass was added later as a sort of to tell visitors that it was a clue. It was something for them to be looking at. There were a lot of articles in the newspaper about what was going on in Portsmouth at the time. There were a lot of, things for sale, books, for example. So we looked through a lot of those, what was being sold in Portsmouth at the time. And we were able to reproduce a few books that might have been in the house at the time. Mrs. Walsh also was sick at the time, and that was one of our main interpretive stories. And so there was a lot of information about what types of medicines were being sold in Portsmouth as well. So we took some of that medical information and created, pill bottles and tinctures and things like that to display in the house. The probate records had a lot of information because Walsh was in a lot of debt. And so it had a lot of information about where they had frequented and what they had purchased. And this is an example of some of the doctors that they had owed money to at Captain Walsh's death. And so we reproduced, or we kind of created some receipts that would give visitors clues about what types of medications Mrs. Walsh was taking and lead them to understanding what her ailment was. So we used that also. The daughters had purchased a lot of ribbons and just items for dresses and accessories and things like that. So we have those throughout the house as well. So one of our big interpretive themes was what's ailing Mrs. Walsh. And so it's a kind of an intriguing question that we send visitors to the house to kind of try to figure out on their own. I mentioned some of the receipts that we have, the medical bottles the bed chamber is down there because Mrs. Walsh was ailing. She had dropsy, and it would have been difficult for her to get up and down the stairs. So that's what gave us an opportunity to kind of show a bed chamber, but also to help tell the story of Mrs. Walsh's illness. We also have a medical pocketbook that we know is available in Portsmouth through those newspaper articles, open to the page on how to, some of the remedies that would have been available for the condition of dropsy. Another one of our sort of interpretive themes was to talk about cost, but cost in a different way. So what is the human cost, say, of a loaf of sugar? So we had labels created that talked about, the enslaved people that would have gone into working on those sugar plantations, and just tried to make people think about not just the price, but the human cost or the environmental cost. So over on the left side, there's mahogany. It's a mahogany sideboard with a mahogany tray, and the label talks about the environmental cost of all of that, harvesting all of that mahogany. We have one on sugar, cotton, pine, throughout the house. And then another one of our interpretive focal points was the gardens and the outside of the house and how it was used. And we worked with our horticulture department to get some of the plants that would have been available to the Walsh family. And all of these are medicinal remedies for dropsy. So there's angelica and foxglove, which would have been digitalis. There's garlic and iris, all of which were different diuretics and things that would have helped treat the dropsy. For our collaborators, we had many, many people that we collaborated with, but the three main people that we used were Maud Asen helped us with front-end evaluation. So she got a lot of focus groups together. She found out who our stakeholders were, and she just talked to people a lot about the connections, different types of connections that they would have to the house. And so we could figure out what was relevant to people and what themes we should be following. Amy Huffnagel helped us with interpreter training. It was a very different way of interpreting from what our docents were used to. So our interpreters are used to kind of telling everything that they know, sharing the whole story. And in this sense, we wanted the visitor to be the historian and the visitor to look at the clues. So we had to train them on how to get visitors' curiosity sparked, and have, what kinds of information to give them to help them become curious and want to go in and want to explore. We also collaborated with H2 Design Studio. They did a lot of the signage in the houses, some of the labels. They created a map of Captain Walsh's voyages for us. They created a little card clue cards that were outside on the signs. They have different questions on them that visitors can take and sort of help focus them on what they are investigating. They created some letters for us. We produced some letters that we didn't actually have any real letters, but we used the information that we had to create some possible letters between family members that gave visitors clues about different things. The lessons that we learned, we had gone into this hoping that we could create a house that didn't need to be interpreted, that would be, visitors could go in, it would be completely hands-on. But what we realized is that we really did need an interpreter to help direct visitors and make meaning of what they were looking at. Most people needed prompting. So originally we didn't want to have labels. We didn't want to, I wanted to be, a complete space that felt like you just walked into the 18th or the early 19th century. But they really did need those kind of prompting clues. And so that's why we started using the magnifying glass to sort of direct them to where they could find information. We found a difference between the way that the kids interacted with the space as with adults. We didn't want this to be a kids' play space necessarily, but because it is hands-on, kids are able to, go in and we see a lot of kids, using it as a pretend play space. And they didn't really need prompting for that. The adults, on the other hand, many of them still they were in, museum mode where you can't touch anything and were very reluctant to actually open drawers and look in things and sit on furniture. And so they're more likely to do that if you give them some space and there's not a person in the room kind of watching what they're doing. And so we needed to give them the permission to do that, but then kind of stand back and let them explore on their own. One of the things we don't have an exhibit designer on staff. And so we would have definitely brought in an exhibit designer a little bit earlier in the planning process. There were a lot of things when we got them to show them the house that they had great ideas about, but was a little bit too late to implement and also cost prohibitive at that point. A lot of this was done through an IMLS grant. And so we could have had a lot of that exhibit design written into the grant had we known. We tried to stay away from technology, but just putting it in where it could be effective. So the most effective places where we use technology were in the fireplaces. We have H2 helped us have a fire, kind of a fireplace crackling sound, and using lights to sort of indicate that there is a fire going. And it really does provide a difference when visitors walk into the space. They almost feel like, even though it's not on and there's no heat coming from it, they talk about how cozy it feels and things like that. And that has been a good success for us. Some of the other things they did, they put, we have some dishes, and when you move the dishes to different places, Mrs. Walsh's voice comes on talking about how to set a table and different eating etiquette and things like that. Those pieces have been a little bit difficult to maintain, that kind of technology. So I would say, the fireplace is very low maintenance, and some of the audio with people talking has been more effective for us. I'm happy to talk about role playing if anyone is interested. We tried role playing in the house and it was very different. Being a role player in a hands-on and discovery-based space where the visitors were asking very different questions of our role players. So if anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to talk about that. In terms of the reaction that we got, not everyone liked the new approach. So here's some quotes that we had from people that wanted more labels, more information given to them, really wanted, the typical interpretation that we were giving in other spaces where the interpreter was telling a lot of the information in kind of a story form. But then we did get quite a few visitor comments that were very positive about the experience. That learning about the past made people think about, it's exactly what we wanted to do, was have them connect to their lives today, think about, medicine in the past, medicine today, make those comparisons. We wanted them to, leave more curious than they started. And, there were people that talked about wanting to find out about their family and wanting to go and learn more. So I think we had overall, it was a success. Our greatest takeaways were that there's no failure, only learning. So we did a lot of piloting and there were things that didn't work and things that did, but we learned from those things. Um, Staff training is essential, and it's very important that they need time to practice. They need time to really get into a new mode of interpreting. Um, Talking about what you don't know is educational too. There's a lot of information about the Walsh family that we don't have and we don't know. And talking about why we don't know that information was very educational. And that visitors did need some direction. So that was, we really did learn that we needed those icons and we needed to really help them along the way. So yeah, that is our Walsh House interpretation.
Great. Thank you so much, Bekki. Yes, fantastic. I think it's so interesting thinking about both of your approaches, Erica and Bekki. Erica, this very traditional kind of period room interpretation, doing all of this analysis, really looking into the details of primary source material and developing this truly authentic space. And Bekki using those primary sources as kind of a jumping off point for, like you said, this real kind of discovery portion, and trying to get visitors to interact with the space in a different way. And isn't that always the struggle we face with the ways we approach interpretation? We've trained people so well, in a sense, to enjoy museums and reading labels that when we don't give that to them, we hear that, that is critical feedback. So I think it's really interesting to hear about both of kind of your case studies in juxtaposition with each other. So thank you so much for sharing all about your experiences. And with that, we are happy to open it up to questions. So does anyone have any questions for Erica or Bekki? All right. Well, hearing none, feel free to jump in at any time. If you don't feel comfortable sharing on screen, you can feel free to drop a question in the chat and we can read that out loud to them. I wonder, it's really interesting to hear you talk, Bekki, about the idea of bringing in designers early and also having the kind of interpretation, the training of your guides move along with the interpretive process. Erica, I wonder, was the interpretation part of the Yellow Chamber restoration, was that part of your conversation you were having? I know you were doing the broader interpretive planning, but what are maybe some challenges or lessons learned from that experience that you have there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that was I think that was a big challenge for us, is that we hadn't, as far as I know, because the committee began obviously before I even started working there, but I think that the challenge was, to me, that how we were going to interpret this, or how we were going to incorporate the stories or this restoration into the stories, and how were we going to use it in a way that was effective. I think perhaps throughout the 20th century, the organization had simply restored rooms just for accuracy's sake, and to make it look as they would have. And I think that was really the idea here as well. So I think that I would definitely recommend having an interpretive planning process before you do any sort of period restoration. You need to understand what your interpretive goals are, and all be on the same page. So if you're not, then there's no point of doing a room restoration, because otherwise it's just there to look pretty. So I mean, obviously you can learn from it. You can learn from just looking at it and seeing what's there. But again, if you want to have an effective interpretive element of it, then ensure that you do that beforehand.
I think that's so helpful, because I find sometimes with these reinterpretation processes, there's so many aspects to them, right? There's like the actual room itself. there is the interpretation, there's the training, there's the design element, how people are going to interact with it. And sometimes we can get so focused on one aspect, we almost lose sight of the other things, but they really all need to develop in tandem. So thank you for highlighting the importance of that. Bekki, we have a question for you in the chat. And so it says, does the hands-on space set up visitors to expect it in the other houses?
That is a really good question. We talked a lot about that and how that might affect the visits that people had. We try to make sure that our visitors, we suggest that they start in a different place. So our orientation kind of directs them to start in a place where the Walsh House is going to be towards the end of their visit. So they see, we talk about why we have barriers, and they see a lot of places with barriers and with actual period pieces before they get to the Walsh House. So I think that we've tried to do a good job of explaining to people what they're going to see, what different types of interpretation they're going to see. And we do have some other houses where we have rooms that have reproductions, and then other things in that same house are behind barriers. So there's a lot of conversations that happen usually before they get to the Walsh House about what is a reproduction, what is a period artifact, and a collections piece, and why we have those things separate. So it hasn't been too much of a problem for us in that way.
Great, thank you. And I wonder if each of you could tell us, maybe Bekki, you could go first, your timeline in terms of launching it. I think you said, was it 2019 to 2022? Was that your full kind of research, development, implementation timeline?
Yeah, we started talking about it. I think we got the grant in the fall of 2018, maybe. And so we had started talking about it, and we had originally just wanted a hands-on house. That was our goal. And then after 2019 rolled around, it was 2020. And so having a hands-on house was pretty difficult at that point. So we did sort of need to pivot. So during 2020, we reimagined what we would be doing with the house, and that's when we started talking about the discovery aspect and sort of, bringing it more to just touching, but actually kind of minds on and discovering things in the house. So it took a little bit longer because of COVID. But yeah, we used 2021 and 2022 as pilot years. And then by the spring of 2023, when we opened, we had the full exhibit.
That's great, thank you. And Erica, it sounds like with the level of involvement and detail in your project, it was a multi-year process. So I know you weren't there for all of it, but do you have a sense of kind of when this committee started, and from pain analysis to final opening just a few weeks ago, how long that took?
So the committee was formed in 2021. And of course, as we all know, every great project starts with a committee. So 2021, that was formed. And they opened it just now. So our goal had been to open it in the spring of 2024, but there was a lot of unknowns as far as timing, because we had to have, we weren't sure how long it was going to take to finish the fabric and then build the bed, for example. So there was a lot of unknowns as far as the timeline goes. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is the fundraising aspect of it. When you do a restoration like this, I mean, this is an extremely, extremely expensive project. It was over $100,000 from beginning to end. So, the other thing is the fundraising aspect of it. I think that going in and having a true plan of how you're going to pay for it is essential. We did a lot of that on the fly. We also had the benefit of Richard and Jane Nylander being on the committee, and they have a lot of connections in the field, and were able to get a lot of donors just who were, there to support a project because Richard and Jane were involved. And so, yeah, so we had a lot of, I guess, discounts because of them. But it probably would have been $150,000 project, I would guess. So yeah, fundraising is definitely a huge part of the going in before you actually start the work of the restoration.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about that. Bekki, it sounds like you all got an IMLS grant, but was there additional fundraising you had to do, and how did that look, and how did that impact your timeline too?
Our IMLS grant was a matching grant, so we had to match. Most of our match was in staff time. But yeah, I mean, without the grant, we definitely wouldn't have been able to do what we were able to do.
That's great. And Bekki, do you have plans to do this in any of your other houses or any of your other spaces at Strawbery Banke?
We talk about it, so we have a couple of projects coming online. One, we've talked about having sort of a dual, one side of the house be completely hands-on and another side be more traditional exhibit. But in every project that comes up in every new house that we interpret, we definitely talk about this, this sort of type of interpretation and how it might be included for sure.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much. I'll open it up once again if there are any final questions for Erica or Bekki. Either drop those in the chat or just unmute yourself to ask.
I also want to put a plug in for our next month lunch chat. The Historic Sites PAG is joining up with the Library and Archives PAG on Thursday, July 17th. So join us again next month.
Yeah, thank you, Kaylee. We do these virtual lunch chats every month, always with a different theme. So we hope to see you again. Erica and Bekki, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. I appreciate you both so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Nima for hosting, and hopefully we will see you all again next month. Heather, anything you want to say? Final parting Nima
No,
words?
just hope to look forward to seeing you guys at another session. We also do have a couple in-person ones in July, so definitely check out the NEMA calendar on the NEMA website. I'm sure you guys all get our emails, and also save the date for our November conference in Manchester, New Hampshire. So
Yes,
super excited. Yeah,
finally.
we're back to Manhattan. All right, everybody have a good week, and I will see you next month.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you.
Everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.